Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Rob Delaney all about his series Dying for Sex. And I've heard you talk about this character in such an interesting way from the journey of where we first meet him. And he's almost this version of a character in terms of how Molly sees him. And then over time, he becomes this really fully fleshed out, layered emotional person in the script. And I was interested in kind of looking at those early perspectives from Molly's side, how that shaped the way that you started creating and crafting him.
Yeah, well, it was a lovely ramp, I guess, because he starts out sort of perhaps more crudely drawn, and yes, he's seen strictly as a nuisance in a variety of senses, smells, sounds, look. But then as Molly gets to know him and as they sort of gently and sometimes aggressively tear each other's defenses down, he really, becomes a good guy and a kind guy and an attentive, loving guy. And his relationship with Molly is, such a blessing for him. He really benefits, and I think it really changes him quite dramatically.
And when we first meet him, like you said, he's so acerbic and so abrasive at the
Yeah,
beginning. And
yeah.
we learn later that he's been quite lonely and he had a relationship where he was cheated on. And did you feel like he had always kind of been that abrasive, or did you feel like he kind of really became that person after that breakup?
I suspect he became that person because it's sort of like, yeah, there's a crustiness to him, but under that crust, which is not too terribly thick, Molly's able to work through it pretty quickly. There's a good guy with a good heart, and so I think he's probably been getting into some bad habits and into some bad grooves, bad, like not destructive necessarily, but, building up walls and becoming, less permeable to the world outside, which has its drawbacks. I mean, I understand it as a defense mechanism, but if you want to have a really rich and varied life, you do have to be open and you have to be willing to get hurt. And so, yeah, Molly really helps him a lot in that way.
And he has quite an interesting job because he works for 311, which is a job that I would imagine is very kind of by the book and very
Yeah,
specific.
yeah.
And when you saw that in the script, what did that tell you about him or help you figure
Oh,
out?
it just made me laugh. And, I mean, it's like a civic, he's trying to help people, but not in an exciting way. And certainly, there's going to be a by the numbers aspect to what he does. And it's probably a good place for him to hide in some ways. And so that was a wonderful detail that he works for 311.
It's also such a great detail that he has a picture that he proudly displays of him and Bill de Blasio.
So good.
Was that something that was in the script, or was that something that the props department came up with?
That was in the script, and people laughed when we filmed it, and boy did they laugh when it was on TV. When we were at the premiere, I was like, couldn't wait for the Bill de Blasio thing. People roared with laughter. It was pretty fun.
And when you said yes to this project, it sounds like it was before you even read the scripts because it was Kim Rosenstock, it was Liz Merriweather, it was Michelle Williams and Jenny Slate,
Right.
and that was
I
enough for
did
you.
I did read them, but they would have had to been really bad for me to not do it. And they, of course, were wonderful, but I still might have done it, even if they stank. But clearly they didn't. And it was, yeah, I mean, it was so great to read because you're like, oh, wow. It just gets better and better.
And when you were playing those first scenes with Michelle, where he's
Mhm.
just, aggressively eating his burrito as an act of
Yeah.
defiance, how did you find kind of the right comedic tone to step into in that first scene together?
I mean, you always want to do stuff like that. So I didn't find it terribly difficult to be a very annoying nuisance. So no, that was really in my wheelhouse to just be annoying and brutish.
And that
Uh,
first moment that she tells him to pick up the trash, that's the first
yeah,
inkling of both of them
Yeah.
realizing that they kind of like
Yeah.
this dynamic, and did that kind of really crack open creating
Oh yeah,
anything that
that's
follows?
definitely a fulcrum right there. Yeah, we had fun doing that. And our we had doing our trash work. That was fun.
And I know that your first day of filming with Michelle was the day that you were on each side of the wall together. And it
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily going to be that you were going to actually be on the other side of the wall at that
Mhm.
time, but she asked you to do that. How did
Yeah.
that really crack open the relationship between the two of you? Because it also just sounds like it created a lot in terms of how you showed up for each other throughout the whole shoot.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I'm just trying to think like mechanics wise, like how great that the wall literally that I was audible through it, literally, you know what I mean? So anytime you're acting opposite somebody and maybe they're on the phone or whatever, any actor who's not a jerk will do the other side of the phone call. But with this, I think they were like, oh, he probably doesn't, I don't know, will we be able to hear him? And then Michelle was like, can I ask you a favor? Guy I've just met. And I was like, yeah. She goes, would you mind going over there and grunting and moaning? And I was like, with pleasure, Miss Williams. And so went over and so it was just funny. It was a nice sort of break the seal, jump into the pool kind of a moment, and then happy to grunt, and then do some climactic grunting, and then audibly tear open a burrito, and then also begin playing video games. So it was funny and silly, and it was a great way to start.
There's also that aspect with the two of them where when they have that first encounter together face to face,
Mhm.
that they both admit that they've never done anything like this before. And
Yeah.
what was that sense of kind of the two of them just figuring it out together that you wanted to have?
Well, yeah, because you want to see them discover things, right? That's why, that's what we write the scenes that are discovery, not just sort of mundane. So, it- you know, uh, Kim Rosenstock and Liz Merriweather knew, what to show. And and we had a lot of fun. Those are the funnest moments where you see them like the aha moments where they're learning something or realizing something, and as often as not saying anything, but rather what they do shows it. And yeah, those were always good moments.
And neighbor guy as well, he's very aware that she's seeing other people and
Hmm.
having all these encounters with them because he lives next door. He hears things and he walks past her
Yeah.
door all the time. How did you feel like he responded to the idea of that? Because he seems pretty fine with it.
So there's a funny moment in the film Bowfinger that Steve Martin wrote, and his girlfriend is Heather Graham in that movie, and at one point she sleeps with somebody else, and he confronts her. He's like, "You slept with Rick or whatever," and she's like, "Yeah," and he goes, "Oh." Oh, okay. Like she's not like, I'm so sorry. She's like, So? And he's like, oh, I don't have to get upset. You know what I mean? And I've always kind of hung on to that moment. So for me, that was my Bowfinger moment where I was like, you do, she does, oh, well, okay. That's how it is, Um, it's sort of a psychic adjustment that, some people are able to make.
Was that Bowfinger moment thought also in your head when he has to show up to help open the collar on the guy that dresses like a dog and get it off him when
Oh,
he's
for sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, look, he'll benefit if he's nice and game and does that, then he's gonna have a better time with her. So he's not, he knows what's going on.
And the scene where Molly kicks him in the dick is
Mhm.
such a great moment comedically, but then all of a sudden she collapses and it becomes something
Yeah.
different. And I was just
Oh, yeah.
interested in, filming a scene like that, that suddenly you have to shift the dynamics so drastically and so quickly together.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question and a great example because that is sort of one of those key moments to this show where it changes on a dime in a way that is realistic. If she tried to kick somebody aggressively, that way, that could cause her leg, which the bones have cancer in them, to snap. So, and he doesn't know what's happening. So that. that is a good moment that's sort of emblematic of the show. So yeah, getting moments like that uh correct and making them feel real was sort of the, or sort of some of the keystone moments.
And when he finds out about her cancer diagnosis, it's also not something where it's her choice to tell him at that
Yeah,
point. It's her
yeah,
mother who
yeah,
reveals it accidentally or on purpose.
yeah.
And did you think about different ways for him to respond in that moment? Because I feel like he does a really good job at kind of recognizing this isn't about me and this isn't about my emotions right now.
Right. So, yeah, Neighbor Guy, as he was written, he's a he was great in that way that of course it's devastating for him to learn that, but he pretty quickly cottons on to the fact that the cancer's in her, not in him. It's her business, and the biggest thing of the sort of the biggest emotional event of the day is really the mother revealing something that Molly, did not want revealed. So, Neighbor Guy, yeah, is perhaps preternaturally sensitive in that way to understand this is messed up what I've just learned for me, but that's just tiny compared to what's happening there. So he's been pretty good at being sort of like right sized and not making his needs paramount. So yeah, even thinking as we talk about this, well, I'm like, good work, neighbor guy.
And there's the moment as well where he shows up with a plant, and even as he's being laying on the floor blindfolded, he's still talking about the plant and, it's easy to
Yeah,
look after and all those
yeah.
things. Did you feel like he had probably been going over what he was going to say and what that interaction was going to look like for the first time a
Oh,
bunch
for
of
sure. Yeah, because he's got to do, they've got all their sort of coded S&M talk. And but then at the same time, he probably did want to do a nice gesture, but he knew what that would entail. And so yeah, they walk the line pretty. They're having fun. They're having a good time, Molly and Neighbor Guy, for sure. And I think they're both pretty good at walking the line. And so it makes sense that they fall in love.
And the genuine emotion that starts to come into play between them feels like it
Yeah.
really develops in just like these little incremental ways. The first time that he tells her your eyes are mesmerizing,
Yeah.
that's a really big deal between the two of them because they
Yeah.
haven't had conversations like that. And did you find that the scripts really were kind of your guide point for just like gradually incrementally building that?
No question. I mean, look, like I write, and when I write stuff, I hope that the things I write get made. But if they don't, the scripts need to be airtight, and you need to have a nourishing entertainment experience reading them. So these scripts, as a stack of pages, were brilliant. So absolutely, all credit to Liz and Kim for giving us, these explicit roadmaps to creating good characters. They did the heavy lifting. I'm grateful to have been involved, but the script, it was all there for sure.
Did it make you feel like each time you stepped onto set and you were stepping into a scene that you had a really clear idea of where he was in terms of his feelings and in terms of his emotions?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Shannon Murphy, who directed it, the sort of the triumvirate of women, or let's make it a square, and include Nikki Boyer, who is alive and was present and was such a wonderful sort of godmother to the show. To have them around to help us navigate it all was just invaluable. Yeah, so the environment on set was incredible.
Yeah. And speaking of Nikki with Jenny Slate playing her in the film, it's interesting to see Neighbor Guy meet her and they kind of have this space of they don't know each other, but they kind
Yeah.
of recognize each other and he very immediately sees everything that she's doing for Molly. What was the unique space that you kind of quickly found between these two characters?
Well, it's very interesting because, Nikki, as played by Jenny, says pretty clearly, well, I can't do everything for her. Neighbor guy, you've got to take care of certain aspects of the plumbing, for lack of a better term. And neighbor guy's really aware of that. So he's, in lowercase a, awe, of Nikki and what she's doing. So he understands that the relationship she has with Nikki is the most important relationship in the building and in the show. And so, but also, Nikki recognizes that Neighbor Guy does have a role to play in Molly's happiness. So yeah, it's great that it's true there's not a lot of overlap between them, but they certainly respect each other and what the other is doing for the woman that they love.
And with the fact that Neighbor Guy self-admittedly has felt quite lonely and admits
Yeah.
that Molly starts to make him feel less alone, how
Yeah.
did you find the ways in which you wanted that to start really fundamentally changing him? Because it does in so many ways.
Right. So I don't know. Let's say neighbor guy is a graduated cylinder filled with whatever chemical, and Molly pours in some sort of accelerant, and so as things change, any chemists listening are like, that doesn't make sense what you said, but people who are stupid, hopefully they'll understand that metaphor. She really affects him and really takes a sledgehammer to these walls and bad habits that he's built up and sort of settled into. So there's real fundamental change happening inside of him, and she is the catalyst big time. So he really, really benefits from this relationship. I mean, he's going to be a better person, by exponents, following, Molly crossing paths with him.
And the two of them also really develop their own kind of sensibility and almost their own language with each other to the point where when he's in the hospital and they're talking about the fact that he bought her taco socks, that suddenly becomes foreplay for the two of them. And they know exactly the other conversation that they're having at the same time. And, the thoughtfulness of the fact that he remembered that her feet get cold.
Oh my
And
God.
so did you always kind of look at a lot of the scenes and look at the conversations that they were having, and then also look at the idea of what's the conversation that they're actually having underneath this?
Absolutely, right? So like it's all the sex stuff to me, I suspect I would do something very different. I don't think that I would go on a big sexual exploration journey unless I was given drugs to treat my cancer that supercharged my libido. Who knows? But the good thing about all the sex is that it helps in from a television show perspective you get this sort of very kind of pyrotechnic shorthand and these emotional, pressure points that allow you to graduate to the next big interesting thing that happens and stuff. So I think sex is very useful for breaking down barriers, creating embarrassment and pleasure and pain in the case of Molly and Neighbor Guy. So it's really it's great, even though I don't think I would do what these characters do in these situations. I think for the viewer, it's great that that's what they do because, it makes us able to absorb this story sort of faster, if that made an iota of sense, if
No,
you're not in my skull.
it makes perfect sense. I also wanted to ask about the moment where he says, I love you to her, because they've been
Yeah,
very clear about not getting emotional in that
right.
way. And yet, your delivery of it, he feels quite calm in it. And even though she
Yeah,
doesn't say it back, it
yeah.
kind of feels like maybe he was prepared for that scenario. And so I was
Yeah.
interested in your perspective on
Agreed. I think neighbor guy has an emotional intelligence that may have been dormant, but I think he knows that he's feeling love again. He truly cares about her. He's letting her in. And so if he's going to tell her that he loves her and she doesn't love him, hey, that's none of his business. But he's going through his paces emotionally, and that's where he is, and that place is in love. And it's not about I love you, and I hope you'll say it back. It's I love you. That's where I'm at, and it's so yeah, neighbor guy, there's some self-actualization or whatever happening with him. He's definitely evolving in a very positive way.
And when they first see each other outside, out in the wild, they even remark on the fact it's the first time that they've ever seen each other outside of their
Yeah.
building.
Yeah.
Did you also in turn feel like that was a slightly different feeling for you and Michelle to play a scene in a completely different setting for the first
Oh,
time?
brightly lit in pub on a real street, on location, not it was yeah, no, that was great. Um and it was and it true. Yeah, it's the only time that we shot anything outdoors, and we sure were outdoors blocking off a street.
And I love the layers of the scene where she ends up saying that she loves him back to him in that
Yeah,
moment because it's as
yeah,
she's collapsed on the floor and he's laying there, and also the fact that he breaks through with that humor and he's like, I think we've got a real future
yeah.
together. And so I was interested in just the different dynamics and the different spaces that you both really found in a scene like that because again, it just hits like three different tones instantly.
So I'm not going to answer that question. What I'm going to tell you is that I'm going to answer it obliquely. I remember one thing where I'm bent over and somebody who was looking at the monitors, I forget who came over and they're like, your underwear is sticking out the back of your jeans. And I was like, good. He's bent over in distress trying to help someone that he loves. His underwear should be sticking out. But you know what I mean? Like that's it. I didn't know that it was, but when somebody was like, "Do you want to tuck that back in?" I'm like, "No, I want my underwear to be sticking out and I want it to look uncomfortable and awkward." And if you told the real guy your underwear sticking out, he'd be like, "I give a shit if my underwear's sticking. I'm trying to help the woman that I love who's just collapsed. Did another one of her bones explode with like and so that's sort of a dying for sex kind of key to understanding, you know what I mean? Like is like you don't want to look good, you want to look like you care, and anything else is inconsequential.
No, I think that actually perfectly speaks to it. It's such a great moment. And in talking about when he shows up at the hospital for her in
Yeah.
episode 7, the fact that he walks into the room and the first thing that he tells her is like, "You look so hot, you look beautiful." It's
Hmm.
really affirming to her because she doesn't know how she's going to be received, and it probably feels incredibly vulnerable to her. Did you think that he'd kind of planned that opening line out ahead of time?
No way. He saw it, felt it, and said it. I live in London, and sometimes when you're in the tube, you'll hear like, if you see anything or hear anything, you need to report, blah blah. And they go, see it, say it, sorted. And neighbor guy like sees it, says it, sorts it. He's not. There's no artifice anymore. This is how I feel. He knows he has limited time. Oh my God, I walked into the hospital. Maybe she'd look like shit. Maybe she'd look like a ghost. Maybe she's nope. Oh, looks beautiful. Gonna tell her. So that's neighbor guy in action.
Neighbor guy is travel for London.
Yeah, yeah.
There's also so much for him in all of those sequences of events where it's all about him creating the space that she needs. And so, in turn, I was interested in how filming those scenes, it was also you creating that space for Michelle and what she needed in those
Hmm.
scenes in the moment for Molly.
Yeah. Um, well, I think that would be a perfectly fine way to explain love. And so he's trying to help her achieve, if not, physical goals that you can check off on a list, but like emotional goals. He knows because she said that's one of the wonderful things about Molly, what she wants and needs. And neighbor guy views it as a pleasure and a privilege to be able to help deliver. It's really odd because it's so sad for many reasons that Molly dies, but it's very sad for neighbor guy because they wind up a beautiful couple. But now that's not anybody knows that. Yes, it's sad, but also she's going to stay with him in many ways, and he's going to be a better person, a kinder person, a more open person. They talk about like you'll hear like a woman say like, "Well, I think I trained him for his next girlfriend or whatever." Like she gave him a PhD, like the next person, and he's now more poised to really be able to do and deliver and receive love. Whoever neighbor guy really winds up with is going to be much luckier because of his experience with Molly.
And to your point, obviously it is devastating for him, and he does a really great job at not expressing that. And again, it's that holding the space that she needs. Did you find
And
that there was a
can I just thank the writers and director, Liz, Kim, and Shannon, because they definitely had many takes of me like sobbing and being like like legitimately weeping, and they were, so I'm glad they picked the ones that they did.
they cut it all out? But did you find that there were a lot of scenes outside of the takes that you filmed sobbing, now that we know
Yeah.
that, where there was just this real undercurrent of emotion that you would think about going into those moments?
Oh yeah. Those days were very difficult. I did not like. I mean, maybe if Michelle wasn't such a good actress, it would have been easier, but it really felt like being with somebody that you loved and watching them die. It was very hard. And I didn't, I was very physically uncomfortable and sad and crying between takes. And so those were, I mean, easy, easy, the hardest stuff I've ever done on camera, for sure. So yeah, it wasn't nice, but it was a privilege. Like, this hurts, and I'm glad I'm doing it, type stuff.
It hurt the best.
Yeah.
And I've heard you saying that working on this, that one of the most challenging aspects was calibrating that emotion and just kind of figuring out the stamina of it throughout the shoot as well. And
Oh yeah.
I
I
was
mean,
interested in how you approach that once you realized that.
because like I've ran a marathon. I ran the New York City Marathon once. I've done a lot of half marathons. Um, and this was sort of felt like when you're in the long run stage of training, where you kind of really have to budget your energy for the week and the things that you do and like the way that you eat and when and you sleep and what do you say yes to this other thing? So definitely it was exhausting and painful, the stuff that we shot in the hospital. And yeah, for sure, I was very conscious about how I spent my time off camera. And it was strictly doing like cardiovascular exercise, napping, eating very healthy food, like not getting into anything too emotional because I didn't want to cry and not be able to stop and all this stuff. So it was pretty intense, the shooting in the hospital. And was, yeah, more closer to an athletic endeavor. It was like the emotional Olympics.
And obviously your character in the series is called Neighbor Guy, and we never
Mm.
actually learn his name, which is
Yeah,
such an interesting attribute for a character that we spend so
yeah,
much time with. Did you
yeah.
have a name or various names that you conceptualized for him yourself?
Yeah, I think he was either Sandy or Lomax. No, I have no idea. I don't know. uh yeah, no, a lot of times I will do backstory stuff for characters, but for this one I didn't do a goddamn thing because I wanted to be the most naked. And I think it's great that he doesn't have a name because he's a purpose server, for Molly to help her through the end of her life. So I kind of thought he was I don't even know if he was human. So I tried, there was no artifice, there was no like, let me get into, it was just like strip away, be as emotionally honest as possible, um, and bring as much of myself and my own life and experiences to it and just listen and observe and be as openly and honestly affected by her as I could be.
Well, it's a fantastic performance, so thank you so much for talking about it.
Oh,
Appreciate it,
thank
Rob.
you.